Hello grade 7 math students, welcome to our first YouTube lecture. So for the next little bit I'm going to be making lectures on YouTube so that you can watch them and have some instruction on what to do in your math book. And the nice thing about that is if you understand what to do, you can skip through them pretty quickly. Or if you want to re-watch them, you can do that, you can pause it. So hopefully this is helpful to you. And I miss seeing all of you guys. I wish we could be in school together, but please make comments on my video and you can make suggestions on how I can make them better. So last week you guys were doing some problems on data management. So you were just wrapping up your data management unit. So you did some questions on different kinds of averages, mean, median, mode, and also studying range. And then you did some questions on outliers. So if you haven't sent your work in for that yet, please do send that in because I'm grading that. But today we're going to start in our new unit, which is the last unit in our 7.1 math book. You've probably gotten your 7.2 math books from school, and we will start that after we finish this last unit on measurement. So I don't have a board, so I've got some paper to show you. So we're doing measurement, and today, day one, we're doing changing units. But before we get into that, let's talk about what is measurement. So why do we measure things? So, well, we want to see how big they are. We want to compare them to other things. We want to see what's longer or shorter or taller or heavier or all kinds of things. Philosophically, we can measure things like what's more important or who is nicer, things like that. Those things are harder to measure, but we can measure things like length or mass or distance, things like that. So what we can also think about is what do we measure with? So you can really measure with anything. So we could use this Sharpie as a measuring standard. We could say we're going to, instead of using centimeters or inches, we're going to measure people. How tall are they compared to a Sharpie? So you would just measure, okay, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, that was very rough, but I'm approximately 11 Sharpies tall. So if we wanted to, we could decide that was our new standard of measurement. Oh, I'm 11 Sharpies tall. Oh, that person's 12 Sharpies tall, and we could compare it that way. But we have a standard of measurement, and we often use inches, or we use the metric system, which uses centimeters. So that's one type of thing. We could also measure, horses used to be measured in how many hands tall they were. But again, depends how big your hand is. So I have this size hand, what if someone else's was smaller? That just shows that we need common measurements. So if we said, oh, this person's really, really tall, what does that mean? How can we compare those things? So that's why it shows that it's really important that we have these standard measurements that are the same no matter what country or place you go to. A meter is always the same length. So you guys can picture my meter stick that I have in the classroom, and Romeo likes to always go around, holding it up like that. And so that's a meter. So one thing we can measure is length. Okay, so let's look at this chart here. If you need to pause it to look at it, that's fine. But okay, so we have meters in here. So let's just imagine this is a little staircase, and then we have kilometers here and millimeters. And there's other measurements in between, but these are the most common ones we use when we're talking about really long things. So for example, if we're talking about how far one town is from another, then we would talk about kilometers or kilometers. And I'm emphasizing the kilo because kilo is a prefix. It's a word that it's part of a word that comes at the beginning, and kilo means 1,000 times bigger. Okay, so kilometer is 1,000 times bigger than a meter. Okay, and then millimeter, milli means 1,000 times smaller. So a millimeter is 1,000 times smaller than a meter. So if you look at this chart, if we're thinking, let's just say we had 1 kilometer and we wanted to change that to see how many meters we had. Well, we would multiply that by 1,000 and we'd have 1,000 meters. 1,000 meters is the same as 1 kilometer. You would have a lot more meters than you would kilometers because meters are such a small unit, not this small, but they're a smaller unit than a kilometer, so you'd have more of them. And then, so again, if you went backwards, if you said, well, I have 1,000 meters, I don't want such a big number, let's change it into kilometers, then you would divide it by 1,000 and you'd get 1 kilometer, okay? Or if you had 1 meter, you wanted to know how many millimeters you have millimeters are 1,000 times smaller, so you can have 1,000 millimeters for every meter. So to get from 1 meter to a millimeter, you would multiply by 1,000 and you'd have 1,000 millimeters. If you had those 1,000 millimeters and you don't want such a big number, you divide by 1,000 and get how many meters you have. Okay, so you can use this as a means of converting numbers back and forth. Okay, so why would we change units? Why would we want to change from meters to kilometers to millimeters? Why would we want to change other than just the joy of math? Well, sometimes it's you don't want a really huge number, so you don't want to have 1,000,000 millimeters. You'd like to change that into something else so that you don't have such a huge number. Just like if you had 500 pennies, well, people don't use pennies anymore anyway, but when they did, you didn't want to carry around a lot of pennies. You'd like to change that into $5 instead, so that you just had a $5 bill instead of 500 1-cent coins, because it's worth the same thing. So instead of talking about 1,000 meters, it's nicer to talk about 1 kilometer, for example. Or if we had 2 kilometers, that's nicer than saying 2,000 meters sometimes. Sometimes just depends when we would want to talk about those things. Okay, so this is the conversion for that one. So that is talking about length. We can also talk about measure capacity. So capacity means how much can something hold. So the main things we would use for capacity are liters and milliliters. We'll talk about those ones today, and those are for holding liquids. Okay, so we're not going to talk about kiloliters because we don't use those as commonly, but you would know that a kiloliter is 1,000 times bigger than 1 liter. So you would need 1,000 liters to make 1 kiloliter, and you would need 1,000 milliliters to make a liter. Okay, so just like we did on the first paper, I'm going to write down the multiplying and dividing so you can see that. So when you're going up, you're going to divide by 1,000, and then when you're going down the steps, you're going to multiply by 1,000. So that if you had 5 liters and you wanted to change it into milliliters, you change that to 5,000 milliliters. Okay? We can also talk about mass. So this is what we would often refer to as how heavy something is, but mass and weight are, there is a difference between it. It's getting a bit scientific, but basically, so we'll talk about mass. So we often talk about pounds, but in the metric system we use kilograms, grams, and milligrams. So let's look at that. So grams, that's kind of the standard, and then kilograms are 1,000 times bigger, and milligrams are 1,000 times smaller. So we can make these same comparisons. So this is all very convenient because when we're converting, it's really nice to be able to just multiply and divide by thousands, because or by tens or hundreds or thousands, because you guys recently finished a unit on decimals and you know how to multiply by tens, hundreds, and thousands really easily. You know how to how to move the decimal places, right? So if you're dividing by 1,000, you're going to move the decimal place over 3 spaces. And if you're multiplying by 1,000, you're going to move the decimal place over 3 spaces again, just this time to the right, so that the number gets bigger. So you would need 1,000 grams to make up 1 kilogram. You'd need 1,000 milligrams to make 1 gram. Okay, so you can use this to be going back and forth, converting. Okay, and then just getting back to length for a second. So we talked about kilometers, meters, and millimeters. So we know that between millimeters and meters is times 1,000. So you need 1,000 millimeters to make 1 meter. But there's also other steps in here. So millimeters, and we often use centimeters. We don't use decimeters as often, but that's the next step, and then meters. And so each of these steps are 10 times different. So you need 10 millimeters to make 1 centimeter. And if you have a ruler, you can look at that and notice that in your centimeter, there's 10 little lines there, and each of those is a millimeter. And you need 10 of those to get a centimeter. And then 10 centimeters to make 1 decimeter, and 10 decimeters to make a meter. So you would need 100 centimeters to make 1 meter, or 1,000 millimeters to make a meter. Okay, so I'll write those down. So each of these steps are, instead of by 1,000, are by tens. So dividing by 10 every time you go up. So that might sound opposite of what you would think. When you go up the stairs, you divide by 10 because the units are bigger, so you need fewer of them. Okay, so yeah. All right, so that's a little explanation of measurement. Hopefully that wasn't confusing. If you need to rewatch any of that, just do that, and it's also explained in your textbook. So you guys are going to work on pages 166 and 167, and I know that you will say, oh, do we have to do every single question? So I'm going to write down the numbers you have to do here, and I'll put that up here. So you can do, so page 166 to 167, numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 2 of numbers 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. So, okay. Okay, like this. So page 166 and 167. So you have to do 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then you get to choose any 2 of the rest of them. So only just pick 2 of the rest of those questions. Any 2 that you would like to try. So great. So let me know if you have any questions. And so that's for today. So you can send me that work in when you finish that today. Great. Thanks. Bye.